Don't call me your daughter in front of him." My father said it without lowering his voice, like it was a simple instruction, like it was something obvious, something that didn't need to be explained, and then he placed the silver tray into my hands as if that finished the conversation, as if that defined my role for the rest of the night, and I nodded because I always nod first. I always understand before I react. "Of course, Dad," I said, soft enough to sound respectful, clear enough to sound certain, and I smiled the way I practiced. Not too wide, not too cold, just enough to make people comfortable, just enough to make them not ask questions. The dining room was already full, about 30 guests, maybe more, voices layered over each other, laughter that rose and fell in waves, glasses catching the warm yellow light, everything carefully arranged to look effortless. My father stood near the center, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing as he spoke, confident, controlled, exactly the man he wanted them to see, and I moved past him without interrupting, because I knew better than to step into his frame. I carried the tray from one table to the next, offering drinks, refilling glasses, listening without appearing to listen. "Thank you," one woman said, not looking at me, just reaching for a glass. I nodded. "Of course," I replied, gentle, measured. My voice always sits in the middle, never too high, never too sharp. People tend to trust voices like that, they relax around them, they forget to watch what they say, and I remember everything. That's something no one in my family ever really noticed, or maybe they noticed and decided it didn't matter. Either way, it made things easier for me. I passed by my father again, close enough to hear him clearly. "We've put a lot into this," he was saying, "timing, connections, presentation, you know how these things go." The man he was speaking to nodded, impressed. I could see it in the way his shoulders leaned in just slightly, the way his eyes stayed locked on my father's face. Approval is a quiet thing, but it's easy to recognize once you know what it looks like. "And your family?" the man asked casually, like it was just part of the script. My father didn't hesitate, he smiled, smooth, practiced. "They support me," he said, and for a moment, just a moment, his eyes flicked toward me, not long enough for anyone else to notice, just long enough for me to understand exactly what he meant. I kept walking. I always keep walking. I don't stop the moment, I don't correct it, not yet. The tray felt balanced in my hands, steady, predictable. The weight of it didn't bother me. I've carried heavier things without anyone noticing. "Miss, could I get another?" a man at the corner table asked, his tone polite but distant, like I was part of the room, not part of the story. "Of course," I said again, same tone, same smile. I poured the drink carefully, no rush, no hesitation. People notice hesitation, it makes them uncomfortable, and I've never liked making people uncomfortable, not when it's unnecessary. Across the room, my mother sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, posture perfect. She looked exactly the way she always does at events like this, present, composed, and slightly removed. She met my eyes for a second, then looked away, not out of cruelty, not even out of indifference, just habit. That's the word I've come to understand. Habit explains more than intention ever could. I moved toward the long table near the window, the one with the best view, the one my father reserved for his most important guests, the kind of people who measure a man not by what he says, but by how he is received. I placed a glass down in front of a woman who hadn't spoken once since she arrived. She finally looked at me, really looked this time, not at the tray, not at my hands, at me. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes did, just slightly, like she was trying to place something, like she recognized a detail that didn't fit. I held her gaze for a second longer than necessary, just enough to acknowledge her, just enough to let her know I saw her seeing me. Then I stepped back, because timing matters. Everything about a room like this is timing, when to speak, when to move, when to disappear, and when to stay exactly where you are. I turned slightly, adjusting the tray, listening again. "This is going to change everything," my father said, his voice lower now, more serious. People leaned in when he spoke like that, they always do. I've watched it happen my entire life. I've learned the patterns, the pauses, the way confidence shifts into persuasion, and persuasion into control. I've seen it all before, just from a different position, a quieter one, the kind that lets you observe without being observed. And then, just as I reached the edge of the room, just as the noise settled into something steady and predictable, the front door opened. No announcement, no introduction, just the sound of it, soft but precise, and something in the room changed. not dramatically, not all at once, just enough that the conversation slowed, just enough that a few heads turned. And I didn't look immediately, I never do. I let the moment come to me, I let the shift reveal itself. Because that's how you understand what matters, you don't chase it, you wait for it to arrive. And when I finally did look, I saw her step inside, calm, composed, like she belonged there even before anyone had a chance to decide it. And for the first time that night, I felt the room hesitate. No one announced her name, but the room adjusted around her as if it already knew it should. Conversations did not stop all at once, they softened first, like people suddenly remembering to listen more carefully. I watched from where I stood, tray still balanced in my hands, and I noticed the details before anything else, the way she walked without rushing, the way she did not look around to check if she was being seen. She already understood that she was. That kind of certainty is not loud, it does not need to be. It changes a room quietly. My father noticed her a second later than I did, which is unusual for him. He prides himself on reading people quickly, anticipating shifts before they happen. But this time there was a delay, small, but real. I saw it in the way his sentence stopped halfway, the way his hand remained in the air a fraction too long before lowering. "Excuse me," he said to the man in front of him, his tone still controlled, still polite, but no longer leading, now adjusting, that is the difference. I stepped slightly to the side, creating space without making it obvious. I have learned how to move like that, how to exist without interrupting the flow. And from that position I could see her more clearly. She was not dressed louder than anyone else, not trying to stand out, but everything about her was precise, intentional, as if nothing she wore or carried had been chosen without a reason. She paused just inside the doorway for a moment, not hesitating, just observing, taking the room in, and then she began to walk forward, not toward my father, not toward the center, but along the edge first, as if mapping the space before deciding where she wanted to be. That is when a few of the guests began to recognize her. I saw it in their expressions, a subtle shift, a quick exchange of looks. One man straightened his jacket, another lowered his voice mid-sentence. Recognition does not always come with words. Sometimes it comes with posture, with attention, with silence. My father reached her just as she moved past the second table. "Good evening," he said, extending his hand, confident again, or at least attempting to be. "I do not believe we have met." His smile was exactly the right size, not too eager, not too distant, practiced over years of rooms like this. She looked at his hand, then at his face, and for a moment she did not take it, not out of disrespect, just choice. Then she did, briefly. "Good evening," she replied, her voice calm, steady. The kind that does not compete with noise because it does not need to. "We have not," she added, and that was all. No introduction, no explanation, just a statement, clean and complete. My father nodded, adjusting again. "Welcome, we are glad you could join us," he said, shifting into host mode, the role he understands best. "May I ask who invited you?" It was a polite question, but it carried weight. It drew a line. It asked for context. She held his gaze, not challenging, not yielding, simply holding it. "I was told this would be a gathering worth attending," she said. And there was something in the way she said it that made the sentence feel like more than it was, like it contained information that had not been spoken yet. My father let out a small laugh, controlled, appreciative. "Well, I certainly hope we live up to that expectation," he replied, but I could hear the calculation behind it now, the adjustment of strategy, the shift from presentation to assessment. He stepped slightly to the side, gesturing toward the main table. "Please, join us," he said, offering her the position he reserves for people he wants to impress or align with. And that is when she did something that changed the room again. She did not move toward the table, she did not follow his gesture. Instead, she looked past him, past the center, past the arrangement he had built so carefully, and her eyes found me again, exactly where I was standing, exactly where I had been placed, not hidden, not visible, just positioned. She held that look for a second, longer than before, enough that the distance between us felt intentional, enough that it was no longer something only I could notice. A few people followed her gaze without realizing it. Curiosity works like that, it spreads quietly, and I felt it move through the room, a shift in attention, small, but growing. I adjusted the tray slightly, not because I needed to, but because it gave my hands something to do, something steady, something familiar. "Excuse me," I said softly to the guest in front of me, stepping around him with care, maintaining the same rhythm, the same composure. I did not rush, I did not hesitate, I simply moved, and with each step I could feel the space changing, the air holding just a little tighter, the conversations thinning out just a little more. My father noticed it too. I saw him turn slightly, following the direction of her attention, and for the first time that night, his expression did not settle immediately. It paused, just for a second, as if something did not align with what he expected, and then she spoke again, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly enough to be heard beyond the immediate circle. "I think I would like to start over there," she said, her eyes still on me, her tone unchanged, calm, precise, and the room, without fully understanding why, began to listen. The tray in my hands felt lighter the moment she said it, not because the weight changed but because the room did. Attention has weight, and now it was shifting, moving, settling somewhere it had not been before. I stepped forward, not fast, not slow, just enough to meet her halfway without making it obvious that I understood what she was doing. "Of course," I said gently, my voice steady, respectful, the same tone I had used all night. Because tone matters more when the room is listening. She stopped a few feet in front of me, close enough that the distance between us felt deliberate, not accidental, and for a second, neither of us spoke, not out of hesitation, just recognition, the kind that does not need to rush. Then she smiled, not broadly, not performatively, just enough to acknowledge something private within a very public space. "Tige Monroe," she said, and she said it like it belonged in the room, like it had always belonged there, like it had just been waiting for someone to place it correctly. I inclined my head slightly. "Good evening," I replied, calm, composed, as if my name being spoken in that moment was expected, as if it did not shift anything, even though I could feel the entire room adjust around it. Names change things, especially when they are said at the right time. Behind her, I heard my father's voice again, quieter now, controlled in a different way. "You know each other?" he asked. And there was something beneath the question, not suspicion, not yet, just a recalibration. She turned her head slightly toward him, but she did not step away from me, she did not break the line she had created. "We have worked in the same circles," she said, and the wording was precise, not too revealing, not dismissive either, just enough to establish connection without explaining it. My father nodded once, absorbing that, adjusting again. I could see it in the way his shoulders squared, the way his posture reasserted itself. He stepped closer, not too close, just enough to be included. "I was not aware," he said, his tone polite, even, but no longer leading the conversation, now following it. "That is the difference people often miss. Leadership is not in volume, it is in direction," and direction had shifted. I adjusted the tray again, placing a glass carefully on the nearby table. The small sound of it touching the surface carried further than it should have. "Silence amplifies everything. I did not realize you would be here tonight," she continued, her attention returning fully to me, and there was a question inside the statement, not asked directly, but present. I met her gaze, holding it just long enough. "Neither did I said, and that was true, in more ways than one. She studied me for a second, not evaluating, just confirming, and then she nodded, as if something aligned, something clicked into place. Behind us, the room was no longer pretending not to listen. Conversations had thinned into fragments, people were watching now, openly. Curiosity had moved into attention, attention into expectation. And expectation has a way of pulling truth forward whether you are ready or not. My father cleared his throat lightly, a small sound, but intentional. "Perhaps we should all sit," he suggested, gesturing again toward the main table, trying to recenter the room, to restore the structure he had built. She did not move immediately. She glanced at the table, then back at me, and then she did something subtle, but decisive. She reached out and took one of the glasses from the tray in my hand, not hurried, not hesitant, just deliberate, and as she did, her fingers brushed mine for the briefest moment, not enough to be noticed by anyone else, but enough to anchor the moment. "Thank you," she said, softly, and then, just as calmly, she added, "But I think this is a better place to begin." She turned slightly, positioning herself beside me instead of moving away, aligning rather than separating, and that single choice, that small shift in position, changed everything again, because now I was no longer standing alone at the edge of the room. I was standing next to the one person everyone had started to notice, and the Contrast was no longer quiet, it was visible, undeniable. My father saw it too. I could tell by the way his expression held for a second longer than it should have, the way his next movement was just slightly delayed, and in that delay, something fragile appeared, not weakness, not yet, just the awareness that something was not unfolding the way he had planned. Tige, he said, my name careful on his tongue now, measured. Why do not you? He paused, searching for the right continuation, the right instruction, something that would restore the order he preferred. I looked at him, not challenging, not yielding, just present, and for the first time that night, I did not move immediately when he spoke. I simply waited, and the room waited with me. My father's sentence did not finish, and that was the first real crack, not loud, not dramatic, but visible to anyone who knew how to look for it. Tige, he said again, steadier this time, why do not you continue serving our guests? The word "our" was intentional, carefully placed, a quiet reminder of roles, of ownership, of where he believed everything belonged. I held his gaze for a moment, not long enough to challenge, just long enough to acknowledge that I had heard him clearly. Of course, Dad, I replied, my tone unchanged, polite, measured, the same voice that had carried me through the entire evening, but I did not move right away, not this time, and the pause was small, barely a second, but in a room like this, a second can stretch, it can shift attention, it can create questions where there were none before. The woman beside me noticed it too. I could feel it in the way her posture remained aligned with mine, not stepping away, not stepping forward, simply holding position. And that choice, that stillness, made my pause more visible than it should have been. My father adjusted his stance slightly, a subtle shift of weight, the kind people use when they are recalculating without wanting to appear as if they are. We have a schedule to keep, he added, lightly, as if to soften the instruction, as if to make it sound like a shared responsibility rather than a directive. I inclined my head again. Of course, I repeated, and this time I moved, but not in the direction he expected. Instead of turning back toward the outer tables, I stepped toward the main area, closer to where he stood, closer to where the room was focused. The tray still balanced, the same steady rhythm, but the distance had changed, and distance changes perception. I could feel the attention follow, not fully, not all at once, but enough to be noticed, enough to be felt. The woman beside me took a small sip from the glass she had taken earlier, her eyes never leaving the space between my father and me, observing, not interfering, but not disengaging either. She understood the moment, that much was clear. Dad, I said softly, the word respectful. Intentional, placed carefully so it would be heard without needing to be raised, and it was heard, not just by him, but by the people closest to us. A few heads turned more openly now, conversations quieted further, the room narrowing its focus. Yes, he replied, quickly, too quickly, as if he had been waiting for me to return to script, to restore the balance he preferred. Would you like me to bring something to the main table? I asked, and the question was simple, appropriate, entirely within the role he had assigned me, but there was something underneath it, something in the way it was timed, the way it redirected attention toward the center, toward him, toward the structure he had created. He nodded, relieved, or perhaps just reassured. Yes, that would be helpful, he said, and his voice settled again, confidence returning in small increments. He gestured toward the table. We will begin shortly, he added, louder now, addressing the room as much as me, reclaiming his position as host. The room responded to that, as rooms like this always do. People shifted, chairs adjusted, glasses were set down, the structure was reassembling, piece by piece, and I stepped forward, placing the tray carefully on the edge of the main table, the soft clink of glass against polished wood marking the moment, marking the transition. I began to set each glass in place, one by one, precise, unhurried, each movement deliberate, and as I did, I spoke quietly, not to the room, not to my father, but just enough for those closest to hear. I always make sure everything is exactly where it needs to be, I said, my tone calm, almost conversational, but the words carried, they settled into the space, into the attention that had gathered. My father glanced at me, briefly, a flicker of something crossing his expression, not concern, not yet, just awareness, the kind that comes when something familiar begins to feel slightly unfamiliar. I finished placing the last glass and straightened, my hands now free, the tray no longer between me and the room, and that changed something too. Objects create distance. Without them, Presence becomes clearer, more direct. The woman stepped forward. Then, closing the small gap that remained between us, aligning herself fully at my side, and when she spoke again, her voice carried just enough to reach beyond the table, beyond the immediate circle. "It seems you have already done that," she said, and there was a quiet approval in her tone, not exaggerated, not performative, just real. My father turned toward her, ready to respond, ready to reclaim, but before he could, she continued, her attention still on me. "You always do not you?" She added, and this time it was not a question, it was a statement, a recognition, and recognition, once spoken aloud, has a way of reshaping everything that follows. The room held that moment, suspended, waiting, and for the first time that night, my father did not speak immediately. He simply looked at me, as if trying to understand something he had not needed to understand before. The room did not move, not yet. It held the moment the way people do when they sense something is about to happen but do not know what it is, and that uncertainty is what keeps them still. My father shifted his weight again, subtle, controlled, but no longer invisible. "I believe we should begin," he said, his voice firm now, reclaiming structure, reclaiming timing. He reached for his glass, lifting it slightly, a signal more than a gesture, the kind that tells people where to focus, and they followed. They always follow when direction is clear enough, but this time it was not complete, not fully anchored, because attention had already moved, not entirely, but enough to fracture the center. The woman beside me did not lift her glass, she did not look at him, she looked at me, still, steady, as if the moment had not ended for her, as if it had only just begun. "Tige," she said again, my name settling into the room a second time, more familiar now, less surprising, and because of that, more powerful. Repetition changes meaning. I turned my head slightly toward her. "Yes," I replied, calm, composed, the same tone I had used all night, but now there was no tray in my hands, nothing between me and the space around me. "I was wondering," she continued, her voice measured, deliberate, "if you would join me for a moment." The request was simple, polite, but it shifted something fundamental, because it was not directed through my father, not acknowledged by him, it bypassed him entirely, and that kind of redirection is not loud, but it is unmistakable. My father lowered his glass slightly, not fully, just enough to pause, to reassess. "She is assisting this evening," he said, stepping in, his tone still courteous, but firmer now, drawing a boundary, reasserting control. "Of course," she replied. Immediately, without resistance, without contradiction, and for a second it sounded like agreement, like compliance, but then she added, just as evenly, "and she is doing it exceptionally well." And there it was again, recognition, placed carefully, publicly, not exaggerated, not emotional, just precise, the kind of statement that does not invite argument because it does not need to defend itself. A few people nodded, almost unconsciously, small movements, but visible. Alignment begins like that, quietly. My father noticed it. I saw the way his expression held, just for a moment, just long enough to register the shift. "We will only take a moment," she continued, her attention returning to me, not waiting for permission, not asking for it, just stating intention, and in that statement, there was an assumption, not of authority, but of inevitability. I met her gaze, steady, unhurried. "Of course," I said, the same words I had used before, but now they carried something different. Because they were no longer directed upward, they were aligned sideways, equal in tone, equal in weight. And that difference did not go unnoticed. My father exhaled quietly, a controlled breath, recalibration. "Again, very well," he said, and the words were smooth, but the timing was not, just slightly delayed, just enough to reveal that the decision had not originated from him, and that was new, that was unfamiliar. I stepped away from the table then, not quickly, not hesitantly, just deliberately, and she moved with me, not leading, not following, simply matching pace. And together we shifted a few steps to the side, just enough to create a small space within the larger room, not private, but distinct, a boundary formed by attention rather than distance. "You have been very consistent tonight," she said quietly, her voice lowered now, but still clear, still precise. "Consistent?" I repeated, not questioning, just reflecting. She nodded once. "In how you respond," she said, "in what you choose not to say." There was no accusation in her tone, no judgment, just observation, and I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging it. "It has been a useful skill," I replied, calm, measured, Because that is what it is, not weakness, not silence, but control. She studied me for a moment, not evaluating, just confirming again. It usually is, she said, and then she glanced briefly toward my father, still standing at the table, still holding the room, but not in the same way as before, not completely. But it is not always necessary, she added, and that sentence settled between us, not heavy, not urgent, just present, like a door that has been pointed out but not yet opened. I did not respond immediately. I let the words sit, I let the room breathe around them, and then I spoke, softly, evenly. Timing matters, I said, and she smiled, slightly, not wide, not performative, just enough to acknowledge that I understood, that I was not reacting, that I was choosing. Yes, she said, it does. And behind us, I could feel the room waiting again, not for my father this time, not entirely, but for something else, something that had not yet been said, something that was beginning to take shape, and for the first time that night, I knew exactly when I would say it. The moment did not break, it stretched, quiet but tense, like a held breath that no one wanted to release first. I turned slightly back toward the main table, not fully, just enough to acknowledge the room again, because the room mattered now. It was no longer just background, it had become part of the outcome. My father had already resumed his stance, glass in hand, posture reset, voice ready. Thank you all for being here tonight, he began, smooth again, practiced, his tone filling the space with something familiar, something structured. People responded to that, shoulders relaxed slightly, attention redirected. Comfort returned in small, controlled portions, but it was not complete, not fully stable, because there was still something unresolved, something that had not been addressed, and everyone could feel it even if they could not name it. I stepped back toward the table, not interrupting him, not taking over, just re-entering the frame, the same calm presence, the same measured movement, but now without the tray, without the role he had given me. And that difference was visible. We have spent months preparing for this, my father continued, his voice steady, confident. Every detail has been considered, and as he said it, his eyes moved briefly across the table, across the glasses, the arrangement, the precision, and then, almost without meaning to, they landed on me, just for a second, and in that second, something shifted again. I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging the glance, not challenging it. Just recognizing it for what it was. It shows, the woman beside me said, her voice entering the space without raising it, without disrupting his rhythm, but altering it nonetheless. He turned toward her, quickly this time, ready, attentive. I am glad you think so, he replied, and there was a hint of relief there, subtle, but real. Validation from the right person carries weight, and he understood that. It is not easy to create something that feels this controlled, she added. And the word lingered just slightly longer than the others. Controlled. It was accurate, it was appropriate, and it carried something else underneath, something that made the word feel less like a compliment and more like a mirror. My father smiled, measured. Control is part of the process, he said, and his voice was firm again, reclaiming ground, reaffirming position. Of course, she replied, nodding once. It is also part of perception. And that sentence landed differently, not heavy, not confrontational, but precise, like a line drawn lightly but intentionally. A few guests exchanged looks, small, quick, the kind that signal curiosity turning into awareness. I watched the shift. I always watch the shift. It is where everything begins. My father let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh. Perception is exactly what tonight is about, he said, and now his voice carried more energy, more projection. He was building again, returning to what he knew, and perception depends on clarity, I said softly, not loud enough to interrupt, but clear enough to be heard within the circle that mattered. The timing was exact, not early, not late, just aligned with the space that had opened. My father paused, not long, but enough for the sentence to register, enough for the room to catch it. His eyes moved to me again, this time more directly. Clarity, he repeated, and it sounded like a question, but also like a request for control, for direction. I met his gaze, steady, respectful. Yes, Dad, I said, my tone unchanged, still calm, still measured, but no longer positioned beneath his, no longer following, just present. Clarity makes perception easier to maintain, I added. And the words were simple, neutral even, but they carried weight because of where they were placed, because of when they were said. The woman beside me watched closely now, not stepping in, not speaking, just allowing the moment to unfold, because she understood something my father was only beginning to realize, that the structure he had built was still standing, but it was no longer entirely his to control. "And what would you suggest we clarify?" my father asked, his voice controlled again, but tighter now, more focused. The question was direct, but it carried something underneath. Something cautious. I held his gaze for a second longer this time, just enough to acknowledge the shift, just enough to make the room feel it. "Only what has already been said," I replied, and I let the sentence settle, not rushing to explain it, not softening it, just allowing it to exist in the space between us, and behind us. The room leaned in, not physically, not obviously, but in attention, in silence, in the way people wait when they know something important is about to be revealed. And for the first time that night, my father did not move to fill that silence. He simply stood there, looking at me, as if waiting to see what I would do next. I did not answer immediately, not because I did not have one, but because the moment needed space, and space changes how people hear things. My father was still looking at me, waiting, not commanding this time, not directing, just waiting, and that alone shifted the balance more than anything I could have said too quickly. I let the silence sit just a second longer, then I moved, slowly, deliberately, stepping just enough to stand fully in the line of sight of the room, not behind him, not beside him, but visible, clearly, unmistakably visible. "You told me earlier," I said, my voice calm, respectful, carrying just enough to reach the nearest tables, "not to ruin this." The words were simple, familiar, but they landed differently now, because they were no longer private. A few people exchanged glances, small, quick, the kind that means they remember hearing something similar, or sensing it, even if they had not heard it directly. My father's expression held, just slightly, not breaking, but no longer fluid. "I did," he replied, carefully, choosing each word, his tone still composed, but tighter now, more aware. "And I have not," I continued, gently, not contradicting, not accusing, just stating, and the calm in my voice made the words carry further than they should have, because calm removes resistance, it invites attention instead of pushing it away. The woman beside me did not move, did not speak, but I could feel her attention sharpen, not surprised, not uncertain, just focused, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. "Everything has been exactly where it needed to be," I added, echoing my earlier words, but now placing them in a different context. A few heads turned more openly now, the room no longer pretending not to listen, because there was nothing left to pretend about. My father shifted his stance again, subtle, controlled, but the rhythm was no longer smooth. "Tige," he said, my name measured, a warning and a request at the same time. "This is not the time." The sentence was quiet, but it carried, not because of volume, but because of weight. I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging him, respecting the tone, the position, the relationship. "I agree," I said, softly, "and that answer paused him, just for a second, just enough. "That is why I waited," I added, and now the sentence changed direction. It was no longer about disagreement, it was about timing, about intention, about control, the kind that does not need to be asserted loudly because it has already been exercised. The room shifted again, not physically, but in attention, leaning in without moving. The woman beside me glanced briefly toward my father, then back to me, not interrupting, not guiding, just allowing. "You have built something very precise tonight," I continued, my tone still even, still respectful, each word placed carefully, every detail considered. I repeated his earlier phrase, not mocking it, not diminishing it, just returning it, and repetition, in the right moment, changes ownership of a sentence, it moves it, repositions it. My father's eyes remained on me now, fully, no longer scanning the room, no longer managing the audience, just focused, because he understood, at least partially, that the audience was no longer his to manage alone. "And clarity," I said, softly, the word landing with intention, "is what makes that precision hold." I paused, just briefly, not long enough to lose the thread, just long enough to let the word settle. "Clarity." It echoed in the room without needing to be repeated, so I thought it might help. I continued, "To be clear," and that was the shift. The point where suggestion becomes action, where intention becomes visible. A man near the end of the table leaned forward slightly, not realizing he had done it. Another guest set her glass down more carefully than necessary. Small signs, but consistent, attention fully anchored now. My father Exhaled quietly, a controlled breath, recalibration again, but this time slower, more deliberate, clear about what, he asked, and now the question was not just for me, it was for the room, it was an invitation and a defense at the same time. I held his gaze, steady, respectful, not confrontational, not yielding, just present. About roles, I said, simply, and the word landed clean, without decoration, without explanation, just there, and because it was simple, it was harder to deflect. Harder to redirect. The room did not react outwardly, but the silence deepened, the kind that means people are no longer just listening, they are processing, comparing, understanding. My father's hand tightened slightly around his glass, not enough to draw attention, but enough to signal tension, contained, controlled, but real. Roles, he repeated, slower now, as if testing the word, as if measuring its weight. I nodded once. Small, respectful, yes, Dad, I said, and the word Dad carried something different now, not submission, not defiance, just truth, placed clearly, exactly where it belonged, and in that moment, the room understood that something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently, because once something is named clearly, it cannot return to being unseen. My father did not answer right away, and that hesitation carried further than any denial could have. It moved through the room quietly, settling into the spaces between people, into the way they held their glasses, into the way they stopped pretending this was still just a dinner. That is a strange way to describe an evening like this, he said finally, his voice steady again, but now measured differently, not leading, not fully in control, just maintaining, holding what he could. I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging the effort, the composure, because I understood it, I had learned it from him. It depends on where you are standing, I replied, gently, and the sentence did not challenge him, it reframed the room. That is what matters, not confrontation, but perspective. The woman beside me shifted her weight slightly, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just adjusting, as if aligning herself with the moment rather than the people in it. And where are you standing tonight, Tige? My father asked, and now the question was clearer, more direct, no longer about control, but about definition. I held his gaze, steady, respectful, but no longer distant. Right where I have always been, I said, and the words were simple, but they carried history, they carried pattern, they carried years that no one in the room had witnessed but could now begin to understand. A few guests exchanged glances again, slower this time, more thoughtful, because the conversation had shifted from surface to structure, and structure is harder to ignore. My father exhaled quietly, a controlled breath. You are part of this family, he said, and the sentence sounded correct, it sounded appropriate, it sounded like resolution, but it arrived too late, just slightly, just enough to feel like a response rather than a truth. I nodded once, small, acknowledging the words, yes, I said, and then I paused, just long enough to let the agreement settle. That is exactly what I am clarifying, I added, and the room felt that, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly, because clarity does not need force, it needs placement. The woman beside me lifted her glass slightly, not to drink, just to hold it, a small movement, but it drew a line, it marked attention. I think, she said calmly, her voice entering the space without disrupting it, that what Tige is pointing to is not a disagreement. She glanced briefly toward my father, then back to me, but a distinction, and the word distinction shifted everything again, because it removed conflict and replaced it with definition, and definition is harder to argue with. My father turned toward her, listening now, not redirecting, not interrupting, just listening, because he understood that the room was listening to her as well. Distinction, he repeated, slower, measuring the word. She nodded once. Yes, she said. Between presence and position, and that sentence settled into the room with a different weight, not sharp, not heavy, but precise, like something being placed exactly where it belongs. I did not speak immediately, I let her words sit, I let the room process them, because timing still mattered, always. My father's eyes moved between us now, not quickly, not nervously, just deliberately, trying to map something that had not been visible to him before. Tige has been present all evening, she continued, her tone even, her delivery controlled, but her position has been. She paused, not searching, just allowing the word to form, adjusted, and that word carried more than any accusation could have, because it did not blame, it revealed. A man near the far end of the table shifted in his seat, not uncomfortable, but aware, more aware than before. My father let out a quiet breath, longer this time, less controlled, not losing composure, but no longer fully directing it either. That was not the intention, he said, and now the sentence sounded different, not like a defense, not like a correction, but like something closer to acknowledgment. I inclined my head slightly, again, respecting the tone, the effort. The shift. Intentions are not always what people experience, I said softly, and the words were not sharp, not critical, just clear, and clarity, once introduced, continues to shape everything that follows. The woman beside me smiled slightly, not broadly, not dramatically, just enough to confirm alignment, and experience, she added, is what everyone here is responding to. And now the room understood that it was part of the moment, not just observing it, but participating in it, through attention, through perception, through silence. My father looked at me again, fully now, no longer through the lens of host, or father, or position, just looking, as if seeing something that had been there all along but had never required his attention before. So what would you like clarified? He asked, and this time the question was not defensive, not controlling, just direct, open, and that was new, that was the real shift. I met his gaze, steady, calm, and for the first time that night, I did not measure my answer against the room, or the structure, or the expectations. I measured it against truth, only that I am not here by placement, I said, softly, I am here by standing, and the sentence landed clean, without force, without emphasis, just exactly where it needed to be, and the room held it, quietly, completely, because once something is said that clearly, there is nothing left to reinterpret. My words did not echo, they settled. And that was the difference. Echo asks for attention, settling holds it. The room did not react immediately, no gasps, no sudden movement, just stillness, the kind that forms when people recognize something real but are not sure how to respond to it yet. My father looked at me, not through me, not past me, but directly, and for the first time that night, there was no adjustment behind his eyes, no calculation, no repositioning, just recognition, quiet, contained, but undeniable. He lowered his glass slowly, not as a signal, not as a gesture, just because he no longer needed it. Standing, he repeated, and the words sounded different in his voice, less like a question, more like something he was testing for himself. I inclined my head slightly, not confirming, not correcting, just allowing him to arrive at it on his own, because understanding that comes from outside never holds the same weight as understanding that forms internally. The woman beside me remained still, her presence no longer shifting the room, just anchoring it. She had done what she came to do, not by speaking more, but by recognizing at the right moment, and recognition, when it is placed correctly, does not need to repeat itself. My father exhaled, slower now, less controlled, not losing composure, but releasing something he had been holding all evening. I see, he said, and the sentence was simple, but it carried more than any explanation could have. It was not agreement, not fully, not yet, but it was acknowledgment, and acknowledgment changes direction. I did not respond immediately, I did not need to. The room had already shifted, the structure had already adjusted, not broken, just rebalanced. People were no longer looking at me as part of the arrangement, they were looking at me as part of the room, and that distinction is not loud, but it is permanent. My father straightened slightly, not to reclaim, not to dominate, just to continue. But differently. Then let us be clear, he said, his voice steady, but no longer performative, no longer projecting outward for approval, just speaking, and that alone changed how it was received. Everyone here tonight is here because they belong, he continued, and the sentence included me without needing to name me, which is how inclusion should sound when it is real, not pointed, not forced, just present. A few guests nodded, more openly now, not out of politeness, but alignment, because the room had already moved, the words were just catching up. I watched him for a moment, not evaluating, not judging, just observing the shift, because I understand shifts, I recognize them, I measure them by what changes after, not what is said in the moment. The woman beside me took a small sip from her glass, then lowered it again, her role complete, her presence now simply part of the space. That is all I was clarifying, I said, softly, my tone unchanged, calm, respectful, because nothing about my tone needed to change for the meaning to hold. My father nodded once, small, controlled, but genuine, and that was enough. Not resolution, not closure, just enough to mark the moment, to acknowledge that something had been seen that could not be unseen again. The room began to move again, slowly, conversations returning in low tones, not the same as before, more measured, more aware. People adjusting to the new balance without needing to name it, and I stepped back slightly, not retreating, not disappearing, just repositioning within the space that had opened. My hands were empty, my posture unchanged, my presence no longer defined by the role I had been given at the start of the evening, and that was the only change that mattered. My father lifted his glass again, but this time it was not to direct, not to lead, just to participate. To clarity, he said, and the words carried differently now, not as a theme, not as a concept, but as something that had just happened in the room, something that had reshaped it quietly, completely. Glasses lifted, lightly, the sound soft, not celebratory, not dramatic, just present. I reached for a glass myself, not from a tray, not placed for me, just there, within reach, and I held it for a moment before raising it slightly, not high, not for display, just enough. And as I did, I looked at my father, not waiting for approval, not offering defiance, just meeting his eyes as they were now, without adjustment, without performance, and for a second, just a second, everything was still again, not tense, not uncertain, just clear, and I understood something then. Something simple, something quiet, something that did not need to be said out loud, that you do not need to take a place in a room when you already have one, you only need to stop accepting where you were told to stand.